Hello world, and welcome to another episode of Nerdy Niceties. Before we get started, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you like to. I'm not forcing you to. Before we dive in, our topic will be about some facts about the creators of comics, or not comics, but Superman, and ultimately how they were able to get their ownership back after they sold it to DC or National Allied Periodicals at the time. But let's dive in with our first tidbit. In a previous video, I mentioned how Jerry Siegel served in the military during World War II. Well, the other part of the pair for the creators of Superman, Joe Shuster, was not drafted because he was having an eyesight problem that would ultimately cause the end of his cartooning, sequential arting career. But he would still work for DC and ultimately comics before he had to retire. And when he did that, he ultimately became a delivery person, where there's a story by Jerry Robinson, the co-creator of Robin and the Joker, where he says that Shuster showed up, embarrassed some of the employees at DC. The CEO at the time called him up to the office, gave Shuster $100 and told him to find another job. I don't know if there's any validity to that story, but you know, comics. But anyways, going back to the time when Jerry Siegel was in the military, DC stole a story that he previously tried to sell them, and it wasn't sold because DC did not respond within the appropriate 6 weeks that they needed to, and Siegel did not give them permission to afterwards and didn't receive the proper funds. And this was also during the time when he was in active service, so a lot of things got lost and blah blah blah. But anyways, that wasn't all found out until they tried to annul their original contract with DC when it was about to end their 10-year renewal period, end period. I don't know what the contract terms are called, class. But in a secondary trial, because the first one they obviously did not gain the rights to Superman back, it was discovered that Siegel still owned the rights to Superboy. You know, the teenage Superman. Which is also a reason why in Smallville we don't get Superboy until he's Superman, because DC did not own the rights. But getting back into the Superboy thing, while Jerry Siegel did not work on the Superboy comic, Joe Shuster did, because it was nearing the ender times of his career, especially with DC, and he was in need of money. And on the topic of money, in 1975, when the Christopher Reeves Superman movie got announced, the two comic book creators were not doing too well. Around that time, I want to say that Shuster was living in a senior care facility or something like that because of his vision, and Jerry Siegel was fully removed from comics. He was a typist for a Los Angeles Publix department. My bad. But anyways, let me get back to the point. With the success of Superman and them getting into a huge film franchise, unlike the film serials and stuff, which were sort of like earlier comics, they weren't big and successful. They were just more nice and stuff and more artsy. I shouldn't say artsy, but when I'll take a step away to explain it. When Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster sold their comic idea to the comic books, the industry of comic books was nothing to how we in our generations and times could conceive it, because we know comics with Superman, with Batman, Spider-Man, Captain America, Static, a whole list of other characters, teams, Avengers, Justice League, just Marvel and DC, Invincible, Tick. Like, there are a lot of mainstay examples that would not have been the impact of comics that Superman gave was by far none crazy, because comics were mostly just reprints of comic strips or just anthology series, so forth and so on. But Jerry Siegel would reach out to the public with the Christopher Reeves movie coming out and tell them about the state of the creators of Superman and how DC is not showing them any love at that time, and how they were essentially blacklisted and did not get any support for what they did, like I previously stated. And it was essentially a publicity campaign with Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel, along with Jerry Robinson and the person I previously mentioned, and comic book artist Neil Adams, who's also a comic book historian, really huge into comic book creator rights. And with all of that, they were able to ultimately beat DC when Warner Communications gave Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel a yearly lifetime pension that ranged from $20,000 to $30,000 as the times went on, along with health benefits. And they also brought back bylines. Now, taking another step away, when Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster left DC and tried to sue, DC removed bylines afterwards, which is where they credit workers, creators, stuff like that. And it wasn't until this happened that bylines came back. And when I talked about Neil Adams, this and what he also did for comic book creators and a bunch of other organizations that he either inspired or helped fund, or not fund, found fun, but the modern scene of comic books for creators was also heavily influenced because of this as well. See, a double whammy. He likes hitting you with the 1-2. But yeah. Now, this last one is sort of one of my more favorite facts about the creators, specifically Jerry Siegel. But it's the fact that he met his wife during a modeling gig. Because his wife, Joanne, was an artist model. And before World War II, where during that time she was a workship, or she worked as a shipbuilder during World War II for the cause and stuff, Betsy Ross. But also really cool. But anyways, after that time, she moved back to New York. He came back from the military, and the two met at a fundraiser for cartoonists event. and they were married in 1948. Moved around, blah blah blah. And she convinced him to go back to work at DC during his last sort of like span with comics for a time. And that was when he did uncredited work for the Legions of Superheroes for DC, and also did some Superman runs and stuff like that. But that modeling gig was for Joanne to be the model for Lois Lane for Joe Shuster, and during that time Jerry Siegel did the whole Superman. So that's really cool. She was a huge inspiration from what Jerry Siegel said. Listen to her as like not just beautiful, but determined, smart, and courageous. Maybe not in that order, I'm paraphrasing. Sorry, my throat's a little itchy. But I know I'm like getting to say but a lot. But this makes sense, because after he died in the mid to late 90s, she went on to make sure he got a co-authorship share of the copyrights for Superman. And that's very much a Lois Lane thing to do. Like, she was cool when, you know, Superman was doing his stoic ways, but when it went to her reign, she was just like, no, I'm going to make sure my man gets what he deserves. Lois Lane. But anyways, that's about all I have for the Superman stuff. If you found out something new, you know, I hope you enjoyed it. But anyways, have a nice one and keep nerding out.